Hey everybody, welcome back to Tom and Jesse Talk Movies. Hope everybody is well. We have a nice show planned today. We're going to talk about our favorite holiday Christmas movies and about some recommendations for you. Because we're in December now because Halloween flew by and Thanksgiving is done. So we're into December and it's scary how fast it's going. Incredible. If you guys have any comments or questions, please contact us at programs@cshlibrary.org. One day I will remember that.
You and me both.
No, I do, and then we hit record and it goes out the window. So, But okay, so holiday movies. This is a big draw. Like a lot of people love Christmas movies in particular. I have a friend and him and his wife actually, they ironically every year they start watching the Hallmark Christmas movies, but like ironically because they're so bad.
Yes.
And there's so many, and it's the same story over and over again. So usually I join them, but this year's different. So, but holiday movies, I mean, how many times do we see here at the library people are coming in and taking those out? And like growing up, it was always I'd watch a Christmas movie in July and get all excited. So I'll talk about a personal favorite of mine that stems from me being like 7 years old. You'll talk about one that you had watched a lot when you were growing up.
Yes.
So you want to go first?
Sure. We'll talk about my selection, I guess, which was Gremlins, which came out in 1994.
And I've never seen it.
And it's been a long time.
Yeah.
I guess before I give a little synopsis, I'm going to talk about I guess how not only do people change, do preferences change. I mean, this was a movie that I remember like Gizmo, the furry little creature, and I was like, this is the most adorable thing, which it still is. But it's funny because this was a movie that I used to love and I would watch quite frequently around the holiday times. And I guess not to sound pretentious or anything, but like I feel like once we've entered film school or you go to school for film, you can't turn off your critical lens. Yeah. So as much as I tried to just enjoy the movie for being a good, fun movie, there were certain things that stuck out as I'm watching it, and I'm like, well, this kind of bothered me a little bit. So we'll get into that a little bit more. It's interesting to see for your selection if your critical lens, if you're able to turn that off, or but I guess very briefly, a synopsis of Gremlins is that there is this little creature that they really don't seem to explain all that much about, this little furry gremlin little guy. And there's only really 3 rules that you have to abide by when you're caring for gremlins. The way that the film starts off is that there's a father that goes to a store and he sees Gizmo, this little gremlin, and he realizes at all costs he has to purchase this thing. And the owner, the proprietor of the store at first is like, you really, no, not for sale. You're not going to be responsible enough. The proprietor's grandson decides like, hey, we really need the money. The store owner needs the money, so he kind of gives the father Gizmo. The father brings back Gizmo to the house. So the 3 very, very essential rules that cannot be broken. The gremlins cannot eat after midnight. You cannot put a gremlin in water. And what is the last? Oh, they can't be exposed to light. Okay. So 3 very elemental.
Like sunlight? Or?
Yeah, sunlight. Sunlight or any harsh light. Gotcha. So in fact, most of the time, Gizmo stays kind of wrapped up in a blanket, and doesn't stay that way.
Of course.
So what ends up happening in the early goings of the movie is that some water is spilled on Gizmo, and Gizmo starts to kind of proliferate. He starts multiplying rapidly, and there's a ton of other little Gizmos. So that's one thing. Gizmos are okay, though. They're not the bad ones. What happens, though, once you feed them past midnight, that's where all the trouble ensues, because then there are these really not so nice gremlins that come out, and they start destroying the entire town. And they start running rampant over the town, and they literally start destroying the town. So that's a basic premise of the movie. It's about then the son trying to kind of corral all these evil gremlins before the entire town is destroyed, and the good majority of the town is destroyed in the process of the film. So there are a few things that stick out to me. Number one, which I found to be interesting, is that this movie is like exceptionally violent. So this movie was rated PG, and at the time it came out, it was 1984, I believe. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a PG-13 rating. So this was actually one of the movies that engendered the PG-13 rating, which I found to be kind of interesting, because there was this film, and then there was one of the Indiana Jones that came out at the time, and then there was kind of a lot of backlash because these movies are really pretty extremely violent. They decided about 3 months later, after Gremlins came out, this is where they were going to put on the PG-13 rating. So there is a lot of violence in the movie, and there's like people are getting stabbed by the Gremlins. A woman is thrown out the window. So, I mean, this is like, it's not the beloved, friendly holiday movie that I remember.
I'm waiting to see how this ties into Christmas.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you have really young kids at home, you might want to kind of avoid this one. Overall, I have to say, I just, again, Gizmo's incredibly cute. He's incredibly cuddly, and there's some really sweet, good-natured scenes. But I was kind of bored by this. I feel like they spent so much time sort of showcasing the various hijinks that are being caused, and there's like so much, they're kind of showcasing so much of the debauchery with these crazy little gremlins that are really ripping apart the entire town. There's not a lot of character development, and there's not a lot of plot. And I think that's it's unfortunate because so Phoebe Cates is one of the actresses in the movie, and I think she's really interesting. And the way that the movie starts off, we have our protagonist who his car is broken down, and he's kind of down on his luck kid, and it's intimated that he's kind of supporting his family financially. His father, the one that brings Gizmo home for him, is this failed inventor. And some of his inventions are they're absolutely crazy. He's got like a pocket knife that's a toothbrush and like a flosser and all these different things. And meanwhile, you have this kid who's really supporting his family by working at a bank. So there's kind of an interesting foundation of a story right there. And Phoebe Cates becomes the love interest pretty early on. You kind of see that he has feelings for her. And all that is interesting. But because so much of it is focused on, the city being torn apart by these evil gremlins, you kind of lose out on some of that character development. So, again, I'm not sure if this is something that would be important for like an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old, but it is certainly something that I see differently, that I see through a different lens now that I'm going back and I'm analyzing it. It's a cute movie overall. I mean, and what's really cool is I know you and I, from our personal discussions, have talked about, I don't know if this is animatronics or if it's just a ton of practical effects.
Yes,
There's no CGI. Gizmo looks great. And I mean, so the effects still really hold up. I mean, it's not something that you would be instantly turned off by now, 30 years later, because things look so out of place or the effects look so out of place. No, there's none of that. So the stuff actually looks really good. And it's pretty impressive. The animatronics are actually really impressive because there are times where the gremlins are just destroying the town, and like it's pretty well made. It's like a well-made, competently made film, which I found to be interesting. But it's also long. It's an hour and 45 minutes. So I also felt that as opposed to kind of showcasing the town being torn apart, you could have given a little bit more on the character development. So there were times where I was just like, kind of bored. Like I could have fast forwarded through a scene or two, or they could have cut a scene or two where it was just like, you get what they're doing. You get they're tearing apart bars and movie theaters and that sort of thing. I don't feel like I need to see all of that. Okay. If you could have given me a little bit more focus on Phoebe Cates' character, I thought it was really interesting. She's also kind of down on her luck. She's working between a bank and she's a bartender, so she's kind of down on her luck also. She's not that well off. And the protagonist, I apologize, I'm blanking on his name right now.
Was the actor Chris Sarandon? Was it he in that?
I couldn't tell you.
Directed by Joe Dante? Was that Joe Dante? Because I think that's the guy who did The Howling, which was a 1980 popular werewolf.
Well, speaking of horror tie-ins, which is something that we briefly discussed before the show started, the protagonist is actually, he did a film called Waxwork, which is now like an iconic sort of 80s cult horror movie. The acting was good, and again, it's silly. It's just a silly little creature feature feature, but it's hard to market for children, especially kind of knowing what you know now, what I just divulged, that
it doesn't really sound like
it did directly impact the rating guide, where they took a whole new tier of a rating in PG-13 because it was so violent. So it's a tough recommendation for like a younger family. I mean, I know now that I think that we are desensitized to violence in many ways as a society, so maybe it wouldn't be so violent, but I was kind of taken aback by just how violent the film was. So overall, I don't want to say it's a blemish on what I remember Gremlins being like, but it wasn't as good as what I remember it being, so it was a little bit disappointing. There was a sequel to it, which I also haven't seen in years, which is positively received. I'd be interested in maybe trying to go back and review it, but an hour and 45 minutes, it was long.
For that kind of film.
For that,
because that's not a crazy long runtime, but
no.
You know, it's funny how certain movies where it's like this movie does not need to be this long.
And I would see it from the perspective of, I'm not a parent, but I would see it from the perspective of maybe a parent, and I think it would maybe be hard to wrangle your kid up for an hour and 47 minutes. I think they also might be a little bit scared by what's going on, depending on the age, and I think it would be difficult to get a kid to stay put for an hour and 45 minutes. So overall, average, unfortunately, because again, that was like one of the movies that I guess I always viewed with rose-colored glasses.
And it just didn't hold up.
It didn't hold up. I saw it so many years in a row when I was a kid, and I was just a little bit disappointed by it. So I would kind of steer clear.
Okay.
Gizmo still does hold a special place in my heart.
And after, you know, I talk about what, you know, the main feature for this one, we'll just talk about other, you know, holiday films we like.
Sure.
That,
and I guess, I don't know if they don't necessarily have to be, do you want them to be children appropriate for all ages?
I think all type. I think we could do everything, you know, and just a grab bag of
so
everything.
let's talk about your film.
So mine's definitely a more family-friendly movie, Jingle All the Way from 1996. And
another movie that I saw once a year when I was young.
Oh, yeah, me too. This was a movie I had watched many times. It was always on TV growing up. I might have even seen it in the theater. I was like 7 when it came out.
What year do you remember? The year it came out?
I think it was 96.
96.
So, I like it, you know, and it still like holds up for me. It is, I mean, it's a really cool idea because I feel like it's the kind of family movie where kids will be entertained, but there's also a lot for the adults, like adult humor, but like for the parents. And so it is about Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's married to Rita Wilson, who is Tom Hanks' wife in real life. And they have, you know, a kid who's probably like, I don't know, maybe like 10, I would say, 9 or 10, and who's actually played by the kid who was Anakin Skywalker in the Phantom Menace. And this is a movie about Arnold Schwarzenegger's kind of, you know, they're well off and everything, and he's the dad who's always late for the kids' karate practice, and it's always like the ongoing thing is the mom's like, oh, when are you going to be around more? You're always working, blah, blah, blah. So there is this new action figure, new toy that comes out for the holiday season, and it's called the Turbo Man. It's based on like a TV show, and you know, I guess almost like a Power Rangers kind of thing. And the kid wants a Turbo Man action figure, which is kind of like that big. And the dad is like, okay, you know what? I'm going to be dad of the year. I'm going to get this. Because, you know, in the beginning of the movie, like it starts out the kid's doing karate. I think he gets like a new belt. And, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger misses the ceremony, of course. And so he's trying to like make up for it. And, you know, the wife is like, okay, you got this doll, right? Oh, yeah, don't worry. I took care of it. She's like, okay, good, because if you didn't buy now, it's going to be almost impossible. And he's like, oh, man, okay. So the whole movie is about him trying to track down this toy. This is where I feel like the parents will be able to relate, where, I mean, how many, like I knew my parents too, obviously, maybe, you know, your parents was, okay, there's a new toy out for Christmas. We have to get it. It's the latest and greatest, and by this time next year, it's relevant, you know? But I was definitely like, oh, we had to have remember the Tamagotchis and the Pokemon and all that stuff.
My parents from hell.
Yeah, me too. And it's actually, we grew up in the right, there was obviously like video games and stuff, but like I couldn't imagine putting my parents. They were trying to get a PlayStation 5 or a new Xbox. So I actually just like. My mom's like, here, just take my card and I'll just, I'm like, oh, okay, because it's easier. Because if you don't buy it at midnight in 60 seconds, you don't get it.
But doesn't that make this so much more pertinent? I mean, because really, in theory, Turbo, that,
the action figure,
is a timeless synopsis. It's kind of premise because there's always going to be that toy, that thing.
So this is one movie that, like, if I had to make a list of movies that really just sums up my childhood, like, it's this movie, and I was, around the same age as Arnold Schwarzenegger's son in the movie, so it's like this was totally like our generation, and so watching it now, you're like, okay, it's a mid-90s movie, it's obviously outdated, but the idea of the toys and American consumerism, around the holidays is very evident in this movie, and I feel like it can be a timeless classic, even though it is outdated technology-wise. That makes sense. But I just think it's hysterical. Like, yeah, I mean, it's goofy. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator and not an action role. Right. So, but I think he does this well. I think he does comedy well because I feel like Arnold as an actor, like, he's got to be a cool guy because you're watching the movie, it's like, you have to be in on the joke. You have to be able to laugh at yourself. And it's like, this kind of movie works because it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Right. If they were doing this now and it was just like, I don't know, like Ryan Gosling, it wouldn't be as funny. You need somebody, like now it would probably be like Jason Statham or something. Right. But the fact that he has a heavy accent and he's this big macho guy totally adds to the movie. And that's a lot of, the comedy. And it's just him going, throughout the town and the cities, just trying to get this action figure and just the total, adventure of doing all that. And you see what length desperate parents go to. So I think, a parent of young kids would certainly be into this movie, but like you could watch it with your kids too. And it might clue in your kids onto what you go through all year. So, but no, it's really funny. And Phil Hartman is also in it, and he's hysterical in this film. He was on SNL and, a few other things. He's a funny guy, and he has a lot of him and Arnold totally butt heads because he's like one of Arnold's son's friends' dads, and Rita Wilson is very chummy with him, and Arnold's very jealous of their friendship, of course. But they just constantly butt heads, and it's funny. It's like just where they go to. It's over the top. Obviously, it is a movie, and it is, like I said, the mid-90s. So there are times you're like, oh God, there's no online shopping. There's no internet shopping. It's going store to store, which is even crazier. And, it reminds me of also I was big into Beanie Babies when I was like 7 and 8. Of course. And it would be like, we would get in the car and drive out to like Montauk to get them. I still remember. Now,
I remember my birthday Beanie Baby.
Yeah, and
Bucky the Beaver.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, and they were like $60 for this one that just sits on the shelf. Mm-hmm. But so you have some of that in this, but it's just funny in that way, just to see where the character goes. At one point it's like he hears on a radio station like, oh, come down to the radio station. It's just he's all over, and it's just a complete mess, but it's funny. It's an innocent, family Christmas film. I recommend it. I've seen this one a bunch of times. Is it like my favorite, like end all be all? Like, no, of course. And I'll get to some ones that I think are genuinely really great movies as well as holiday films. But this was just fun. It's totally, if there's a holiday movie that sums up my childhood, it's this. So, I strongly recommend it. It's fun. I'm telling you, I would have a sleepover every year with my friend, and that would be the go-to movie. Yeah, it's that kind of movie. So now I want to ask you, because I remember I haven't seen this movie in years, but the last comedic role that I think I recently rewatched, Kindergarten Cop, and like you had said earlier with Arnold Schwarzenegger, he seems to be in on it, and I feel like he's totally okay with self-parodying. Totally into laughing at himself. Right. And that works. And he's exaggerated, and he's so how does his, I mean, it's tough to evaluate Arnold Schwarzenegger as an actor. I don't want to say. No, of course. I mean, this isn't a movie that you're going to get deep into the acting with. but it works because he has that heavy accent and he was, you know, a bodybuilder. And just like there were lines in the film where he's yelling at like Phil Hartman. And it's funny because he has that heavy accent,
Right.
but Arnold's in on the joke. Right. So, you know, that totally, it totally works.
It helps when you can make fun of yourself or allow yourself to make fun.
Exactly. And again, it is a total take on, I mean, not to get like serious, but like it is a total take on, you know, consumerism and, you know, just what everybody goes through, like to being, you know, like, what's the word, just materialistic, you know, that we become as a society, you know, of course. And,
but this is certainly a more lighthearted spin on
yes,
that. But I mean, everyone's...
Of course, there's, exactly. I mean, by the end of the movie, everybody's hugging and it's all great. And there is a nice little message thrown in there at the end. It's not too deep, but it's just good enough for this kind of movie. Like the movie is very much self-aware.
Right.
So it's just incredibly entertaining.
I definitely want to glad to see that it holds up for you.
It's fun, you know, but yeah, it definitely, I mean, it looks like a 90s movie, no doubt, but yeah, it does. It certainly holds up. It's not like, oh, that didn't work. You're still laughing at it. You know, there are some silly moments where I'm like, okay, that was probably funny when I was 7. Mm-hmm. But just all this stuff with the parents, like following the adults is way more entertaining than some kids.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, since you kind of led us into it, do you want to name a favorite, maybe a couple favorite holiday movies? Again, doesn't necessarily have to be kid-friendly or family-appropriate, just something that you like to watch around.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about holiday films for all different ages, of course. So, like, one of probably my personal favorite, and it's really, like, cliche, is A Christmas Story. You know, you've seen A Christmas Story.
Yes. Right? At least some variation.
Yes. You know, the 1983, Darren McGavin is the father, and Melinda Dillon, who was in Close Encounters.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, Christmas Story, yes.
Christmas Story.
Christmas Story.
Yes. And,
yes, I love that.
This is one that was, like, always on in my house growing up because it was always on. They do a 24-hour marathon on, I think, TNT and TBS or one of those. At one point, it was both stations. So I remember being, like, 9 years old, and, like, my parents would be watching it at, like, 11 o'clock at night. They'd be like, oh, you need to go to sleep, Santa's coming, blah, blah. You know, but I still love that movie. I do watch it every year when it is on.
There's so many memorable moments from that movie.
It's just, to me, it's the definitive Christmas movie that it is similar to Jingle All the Way in the sense that it is about, you know, Christmas is coming and there's a certain gift. So this is from the point of view of Ralphie, who is, you know, I would say he's maybe 9 or 10.
He's very young.
You know, but it's not goofy, like in the sense like where Jingle All the Way is. That's more like comedic, like slapstick. This is funny in just the way that like everybody can relate to this kind of stuff that happens to the characters during the holiday season. And, you know, it is Ralphie. He wants this Red Ryder BB gun. Mom, oh, you'll shoot your eye out, of course. And I just think that's just really classic. And the idea of having it take place in the 40s, I love it from you know, just like the production is so great. I love the 1940s aesthetic. I love the house. I believe it's like Indiana. And it's like this beautiful like little farmhouse, but it's in, you know, a cute little town. And it's just so nostalgic. And I mean, it is another movie that definitely sums up my childhood. You know, but like the kids are hysterical, but like, you know, the kids are like
interaction between the parents and the kids, father and son.
The father. This movie is just so brilliant because every character is just like written really well. Every character has their own personality. So like you could tell like it wasn't just like Jingle All the Way. You're not going to get deep into Arnold's character, but you do that in A Christmas Story. And it's like a laugh a minute, but it's totally relatable, even though it is the 1940s. But one thing that makes it really special, I think, is the narration throughout the film. You know, it's done by an older version of Ralphie. And that's really, I think that's just really, it's a classy movie. So, you know, that is a strong recommendation. And But it's something that I don't know if. I mean, I was a mature 9-year-old. I don't know if too many kids would be interested. It's definitely more for the parents, even though it is rated.
I have to say, I think much like you, I was fairly young. I don't know how young I was the first time I saw it, but I ended up passing by the channel. It was TBS or TNT, whatever it was. And I just remember flipping through the guide and like, wow, Christmas Story is on 24 hours.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that in itself has to mean that this movie is at least culturally significant in some way. So,
I'm getting blinded here.
We don't want time to be blinded. This might be our last show for the No,
it is a movie that it's like every year I would always turn it on at different spots, and you just watch it from that moment.
But I was hooked. I was hooked from the first time. And again, I was a teenager. The first time I saw it, I was hooked. So
yeah, exactly.
I think I might have even caught the tail end of it, and I decided to start it over because
And there were certain things I didn't get when I was a kid that I would watch. I'd watch now, but and be like, oh, I get that joke. But A Christmas Story, and then another favorite. I love Elf. Elf is great. So I saw that in theaters.
Okay, I actually saw that recently for the first time. That was a recommendation of my sister.
That is a classic movie.
There is something about that Will Ferrell's, what's the word? I mean,
he has such charm.
He has a lot of charm, and seeing like a 45-year-old squeezed into tights, and this this guile, this belief that like you're seeing the world through his eyes. It's a funny juxtaposition because again he's like this 45-year-old man, but in reality he's playing someone that's never experienced or never seen the big city before. So I
it was cool, but I mean again a movie where it's just like hysterical, quotable.
Right.
Each character has their own personality.
Right.
James Caan.
Yes, and that's
great.
That's such a funny contrast between.
It's so funny. I mean, they might as well have gotten like Robert De Niro or something. Like it's hysterical because James Caan is not known for doing stuff like that anywhere.
The scene that stands out for me in that movie is when was it spaghetti? When
Ferrell's
making spaghetti, he puts some maple syrup and all this other junk. But again, it's like you see this through Will Ferrell's sort of
And then completely different from that is a talk about Krampus, which is a Christmas horror movie.
I saw that in theaters.
Yes,
I love that.
So that's a Christmas horror film. I mean, but again, you can't take it serious. But that's a movie,
and that's a good blend of horror and humor. And I feel like again, like the Evil Dead, we kind of talked about this. It's hard to toe the line between comedy and horror.
Yeah, the
scares were pretty effective, and I love the humor. I love the relationship between them.
It has almost like a fantasy kind of element to it, but like Toni Collette is in it.
Yes.
She's an A-list actor, and she's great.
Yeah.
And I mean that's good. That's definitely not for the kids, but that's another favorite of mine. So, and then I'll just shoot it over to you.
I'll be real quick. I know our time is limited. I'm gonna go straight to the. It's a Wonderful Life for me is important. Nightmare Before Christmas. I know.
We talked
about that. That's kind of an either or, I guess you could say.
Totally.
Die Hard.
Die Hard.
Gotta go Die Hard.
You have to go Die.
And you know what?
And that's a great movie.
I'm gonna take flack for this because we just talked about it. If you want more of it's very debatable. It's very debatable. I've heard the argument. Either way, is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Is it not? Die Hard 2 is a Christmas movie.
Yeah.
Little boring. Once the action gets going, Bruce Willis.
No. The first Die Hard is great because it's a good movie.
Right.
I mean, that's an interesting thing. Like, is it a Christmas movie? I know that's a debate. But yes and no at the same time.
That's why Die Hard 2, and I swear Rennie Harlan is not paying me. Die Hard 2 is more of a Christmas movie than Die Hard 1.
Yeah.
There's even some sort of funny self-aware quips where he's like going through an air duct in the airport and he's like, the same thing is happening to the same guy.
Yeah.
So, again, not the best movie in the world, but if you're looking for action in Christmas, I would say Die Hard. Definitely Die Hard.
And like, what defines a Christmas movie? Does it just have to take place around Christmas, or does Christmas have to be involved with a plot? Because I've seen plenty of movies where it's like this plot can happen anywhere, but it just so happens to be on Christmas Eve.
Right.
And then you get movies like A Christmas Story, which it has to be about Christmas. Right. So Die Hard to me, like yes and no.
Yes. Yeah. Oh no, I totally get that.
Yeah.
So, anyway, those are my picks. And I just want to kind of, before we go, I want to just segue into, because there's certainly other faiths that are represented in movies. I think it's kind of important to touch on maybe a Jewish themed movie, Hanukkah themed movie. I remember seeing one back in the day, years ago, with my extended family, which was 8 Crazy Nights with Adam Sandler. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I love that movie. It's. I wish there were more, from Hollywood at least, more studio, mainstream variety when it comes to that, because Christmas is everywhere, and it's not the only holiday, and I would love to just see how other families, do that. Like, I would love a movie, but like, how many movies do we see? Like, okay, Diane Keaton shows up for Christmas dinner. Like,
they're filming one right.
Exactly. It's like, why can't we have like a funny one with, Diane Keaton goes to like Hanukkah dinner or something like that. And it's a shame that kind of stuff is not, more mainstream, and, certainly Kwanzaa and so forth and other holidays, because it's always Christmas. But, 8 Crazy Nights, I really like. I think it's funny. And it's one of those movies where Adam Sandler is kind of known for always making, like, the Hanukkah song, which is great. And he always pokes fun at the fact that it's like, it's not just Christmas, it's always, there is Hanukkah, and they happen around the same time. And so this movie, 8 Crazy Nights, while it is an animated film, it's definitely not a cartoon movie for kids. I think it is PG-13.
Avoid at all costs.
But he does an excellent job in this film of working in that commentary of, it's Christmas in the town. It's a Christmas town. The trees are everywhere throughout the main street, and he's bitter. And, again, it's not too deep of a movie, but like, you do get into the character's name. His name is Davey. And you get into his character. Why is he so bitter around Christmas? And can you blame him after watching this movie? So I think it's actually really funny.
Right. And I think that's an important point to make. I mean, it was so long ago since I saw it. I remember laughing at it, but I think if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, you might find that
critically panned, unfortunately.
But I think it's an interesting point that you make, that if you do sort of consider other faiths, like you said, it's not only the Jewish faith, it's Kwanzaa as well. I think that in a silly way, depending on what the content of the film is, you might have a Christian person that's seeing a film about Hanukkah for the first time, and if you're maybe talking about some traditions, it gives people a different perspective. Or if maybe if it's a Jewish person that's watching a movie about Kwanzaa for the first time, not all. You can have a nice, fluffy holiday movie, but you can still kind of incorporate certain elements of tradition that are important to certain faiths. It can still be lighthearted and funny, but I think that's, especially now in this time, it's important to breed understanding. So it would be nice if we could kind of open it up a little bit for Hollywood movies to kind of bring another face into the mix. But 8 Crazy Nights is one that
definitely comes to mind. I watched it actually last year, just because I hadn't seen it in a while. And I mean, it holds up. It's definitely goofy, and it's very crude humor, but I think it's funny, and there is a message thrown in there at the end, which I think is pretty important. But I mean, I wish there were more. Like I said, like, why does Hollywood not do these films where why is it always Christmas? I understand that's what sells, but why can't Hanukkah sell as much as Christmas? And I guarantee you, if they did a Hanukkah movie, like I said, like, Diane Keaton, and you throw in like just a bunch of other, let's throw in Kristen Stewart, just all different. It's like, oh, we're going home for Hanukkah. Like, why can't we have that? Because every year on the Hallmark Channel, it's, I'm going back to my hometown, and it's Christmas. Right. Why can't we have that with Hanukkah? It would probably be funny.
I think so.
Because I mean, how many times can we make fun of Santa? So it would be pretty good. So I think that wraps up our show this week.
Yep.
We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about, how you from home can watch movies on your tablet, on your iPhone. We're going to get into the streaming world, and we'll talk about IMDb, Internet Movie Database, and, maybe you like some of the films we mentioned, and you're like, how can I get access to that without literally leaving my couch and me to show you? So questions, comments, programs at cshlibrary.org. If there's any holiday movies, any kind of holiday, the December holiday, of course.
We'd like to hear about
if we miss any, please. If they're important to you, you like them, always looking for recommendations. So we will see you guys next week.
Thanks for watching.